panel of five people, and then we'll leave a space or final Q&A for both the panelists and for Sabine, Jim, and Gonzalo for any final questions that people might have. So in terms of the panel, we're gonna change a bit the order. We're gonna start with Gabriel, for whom it's about 9 o'clock or so in Nairobi, and then we'll go with Samuel, Rinku, Ruslan, and Nobuo. So between 7-8 minutes each, and the idea is for each one of you is to share your thoughts either on the conceptual issues or in the country experiences that you have had in the recent past. So let's start with Gabriel. Gabriel, hopefully you're there. You told me you had a pizza, though, so.
Okay, thanks very much, Jaime. So this whole discussion's been great. I think this is definitely the first time I've been in a meeting for 6 hours by VC and enjoyed the whole thing. So I've really appreciated all of the great exchange. In fact, I was actually going to come to DC for the event, just for the event, but then I realized it would get in the way of my safari plans for this weekend. So that's why I'm still here. And I think that there's been a lot of great things, great elements for me of being in a country office, but I really miss having these kind of intellectual discussions. So I really enjoyed the whole meeting. Okay, so as those who have followed the regime blog debate know, I've been a skeptic of the MPI. Martin Revalian has started calling these this general class of indexes that mash up indexes, which I think is about right. But I think rather than rehash the points that I raised, that myself and others raised in the blog discussion, I'm going to give a slightly talk about two different angles. So first I want to talk about some similar indexes, and then second I'll talk about the possibilities for application of the MPI in the countries where I'm working currently. So first, I think in my reading, the natural antecedent to the MPI is not so much the HDI, but it's much more the unsatisfied basic needs indicators that have been used in Latin America for a long time. So I think that the MBI indicators follow the general class of indicators described by Jim, and they're sort of a simple or degenerate case. And when I worked in the Bank's Poverty Group in Latin America, we spent a lot of time trying to convince the authorities in different countries not to rely on the MBI as their poverty measurement, really for exactly the same concerns that have come up about the MPI, that the weights and the choice of components is arbitrary, and that the weights imply trade-offs between different sub-indicators that are hard to defend. And I think the whole poverty mapping small area estimation industry, which is basically how I got my start at the bank, that got started when some bank researchers were asked to review Ecuador's MBI, and they found it unsatisfying and looked for an alternative approach. So just like the MPI, the MBI's, so that's MBI for the initials in Spanish, the MBIs capture multiple deprivations at the household level, and so just like with the MPI, they have to be based on just one data source. And the MBIs have always been calculated that way. And I looked this up, and the first one was in Argentina in '84, and then there's at least 13 countries in Latin America that have done similar indices, always with a country-specific formula, country-specific set of components and weights. So I was originally going to go through the sort of a detailed discussion of the Argentina case, but just to say just fairly quickly that the way the Argentina indicator's set up, I think it shows clearly one of the problems with these indices. So in the Argentina case, the way it works out is if you have unsatisfied basic needs, you can move up. And it's equivalent, like getting a toilet and sending your kid to school has exactly the same weight. So basically, the index implicitly says those things are of equal value. And I think we should generally feel uncomfortable about having that kind of value system or that evaluation hard-coded into an indicator like that. I mean, clearly, policymakers make those decisions all the time, trying to decide about whether to extend a sanitation network or build a new school, but we really want those decisions to be made in the political arena, not to be, as I said, hard-coded into our poverty measure. Okay, so now let me move on to the second part of my remarks, talking about the specific contexts and places I'm working now. So I'm now, these days I work in North Sudan, South Sudan, and Kenya. And when I signed up to work on Sudan, I didn't realize that it was basically taking over two countries, because they're very different places. And I think the three places give a nice sort of feel for the challenges in implementing an MPI in fairly poor places, because they have very different institutional environments. So first, in Northern Sudan, so there actually is a small crowd of academics in North Sudan who understand poverty measurement issues and could get together and develop an MPI. But I think given the nature of the regime in Sudan, this would definitely be a closed-door process. I mean, they'd be mandated to do this, by the planning minister or the finance ministry. And I think, again, knowing the regime, if the government did undertake to develop an MPI, it would tell the MPI committee to find a set of weights that would show that poverty and especially inequality were lower than other indicators would suggest. So Jim said in his talk that he didn't think that kind of thing would happen because that would make it hard for them to show advancement in the future. So I think maybe he wasn't thinking about Sudan when he made that remark, but if you look at Sudan, you've got a president who's been indicted by the ICC for genocide, and I'm sure they're not going to be constrained by the need for comparability over time in the poverty index. They'll just, when they have a new survey, they'll just come up with a new set of weights so that they can show improvement in the index. Okay, so that's North Sudan. So Southern Sudan, so it's completely different because you have a pretty much open government, a government that's open to discussion and ideas, but they have very, very low capacity. And the Southern Sudanese have a lot to deal with at the moment. There's a referendum on independence in January, so I'm sure developing an MPI would be way down their list of priorities. But at the same time, South Sudan is very, very much dominated by international donors, actually more than any other place I've worked. And so it's very easy for me to imagine some donor representative going to some minister and saying, look, you guys really need an MPI, and we're not going to finance this project until you create one. And I think in that kind of case, the minister would very likely say, fine, we'll do an MPI, why not? But in South Sudan, there's definitely no one with the capability to put together an MPI. So the way that would happen would be that the government or some donor would hire an international consultant to do the work, or maybe the Nairobi-based poverty economist for the World Bank would get tasked with that. But then, so in that case, that would work. But then the whole point of having a country-specific index, which reflected country-specific valuation, would be completely lost. Okay, so that's South Sudan. So the third case is Kenya, which is again a different beast from the other two. So in Kenya, there's a pretty open government, and by sub-Saharan standards, sub-Saharan African standards, there's a large pool of educated people. In Kenya, so very recently, just passed a new constitution, and part of the new constitution it mandates decentralization. And so over the next 2-3 years, there will be a lot of discussion about how to allocate funds from the national government to the new counties that are being created. So I can imagine an MPI being used or being developed and used perhaps to allocate those funds. But I wonder what would be gained in doing that versus the default, which would be for those allocations to be made just within the political process through political dealings and discussion, which would probably take the existing consumption-based poverty measures as their main criteria. So in Kenya too, the ethnic politics is a very big part of what's going on, and I could imagine that if this MPI was developed specifically to allocate funds, because the ethnic groups are divided spatially or concentrated spatially, I could definitely imagine there could be a very, very complicated process to decide who would get on the committee that would decide what was going to go in the MPI, and the party or the group that could manage to manipulate that committee might set out to come up with an indicator that that would end up finding certain areas poorer or worthier of transfers. And I was actually thinking about this, not for Kenya, but just a few minutes ago, I was thinking, so in Sudan, I think what Sudan would want to do is to show, especially that inequality is lower than is apparent from all the other indicators. And so I was sort of thinking, well, okay, what if they asked me to do this? What if they asked for technical assistance on how to do that? It wouldn't be that hard, because you could just take a bunch of things to add to the indicator, which looked pretty similar across the country. You could sort of water down the indicator with a set of inputs that would lead to showing very little difference across the country. So I don't think it doesn't require some sort of great like Machiavellian scheme to manipulate an indicator or manipulate the index like that. But I do think in general, the authors have underrated how limited the group of people are who can understand the details of the NPI in most countries. So, obviously Mexico is not the kind of case I'm thinking of, but I think, as a poverty measure gets to be more complex, the less accessible it's going to be. So, even the poverty gap and the squared poverty gap, just the conventional poverty gap and squared poverty gap, which are, of course, heavily favored by specialists due to their conceptual superiority, I think they're understood and used by a really small group of people. I mean, the typical bank poverty assessment calculates those, but then all the discussion in the government and civil society is about the head count, because the poverty gap index just takes a little bit too much study to understand. And I think even in Kenya, the number of people who really understand poverty measurement enough to contribute meaningfully to developing an NPI is tiny. So you would end up with a process with a small number of people really deciding what was happening, and I think that makes it more subject to manipulation. Okay, so and you could say the same thing, I think, about the FGT measures, conventional FGT measures, that they're, it's a tiny specialized elite who really understand what's going on with those and develop those, but at least the degrees of freedom is substantially reduced, and then the product, which is the poverty line and a fraction below the poverty line, is something that pretty much anybody can grasp. It doesn't seem mystifying. The way I think a lot of the NPI is likely to be for most people. Okay, so I think I'll stop there. I look forward very much to the rest of the panel.
Okay, thank you very much, Gabriel. I think we'll go directly to the rest of the rest of the panelists. Then we'll give also an opportunity to Sabine and Jim, and we'll take a few questions. Let's go to Samuel. Samuel, are you there? Yep.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much for the invitation. Actually, I'm going to concentrate on the case of Bolivia, which I've been working on during the last 12 months. Perhaps make a summary comment on Latin America in general. I think Mexico.
Introduce yourself, Samuel. Samuel Freije.
I'm Samuel Freije from the Poverty Unit, the Latin American region. And that's why I'm talking about Latin America. Pretty much consistent. So in Latin America, I think Mexico has been the front runner on these matters, but also, as it was mentioned before, both Colombia and Chile have already conducted conferences on this issue, and I think they're very much willing to go ahead to have their own multidimensional poverty measures. And I'm going to talk about the case of Bolivia, which I've been working on recently. Let me give you a little bit of the background in Bolivia. Bolivia, after the arrival of President Morales to the presidency, has a new national development plan that is enthrones the idea of vivir bien as a multidimensional concept of welfare. And they want to promote national development in those terms. So they face head-on the need to have a multidimensional measure of poverty. Even though they didn't call it like that, they mentioned once and again that vivir bien was a multidimensional concept. And they wanted to advance the country in a lot of different dimensions that previous governments did not work on. So let me tell you that in this regard, there were both ideological and practical reasons for the Bolivian government to go ahead in this. First, the ideological. They explicitly said that they wanted a beyond or against Western concept of poverty.